My wife has repeatedly had an ambiguous relationship with her superior. I beat the man up like a madman. My wife became teary-eyed with heartache, accusing me of being an impulsive and hot-tempered domestic abuser. My mother-in-law scolded me for being a good-for-nothing who can't give her daughter a decent future. My brother-in-law kept urging me to divorce so my wife could marry someone higher status. When I proposed divorce, my wife used our child as a reason to make me endure it. I wore the green hat my whole life, yet in the end only received my son's resentment. Blame me for refusing to divorce, preventing him from choosing a wealthy stepfather. When I died destitute, I opened my eyes only to find myself back 30 years ago. I opened my eyes to Chun Jia's piercing voice, sharp enough to make my temples throb. Are you out of your mind? How could you hit someone? Do you know who he is? How am I supposed to stay at the company after this? She stood before me, her finger nearly jabbing my nose, eyes brimming with anger and disappointment. I froze for a few seconds. The scene before me felt hauntingly familiar. Her supervisor stood behind her, a trace of blood at the corner of his lips, clearly my recent masterpiece. Chun Jia calmed down. Li Ming reached out to grip her shoulder, his tone nauseatingly gentle. Mr. Zhang might have acted on a momentary impulse. I understand. Chun Jia leaned into his embrace, tears falling like pearls from a broken necklace. Director Li, I'm sorry. I never imagined he'd do this. I stood rooted to the spot, fists clenched tight. This scene mirrored my previous life exactly. In that past life, I'd lost control here, struck Li Ming, been branded a domestic abuser by Chun Jia, scolded mercilessly by my mother-in-law, endured countless humiliations only to end up destitute in my old age. But this time, I refused to repeat that tragedy. Chun Jia. I inhaled deeply. You think I shouldn't have hit him? She froze, her eyes darting evasively. You? Hitting someone is wrong. Director Li is my superior. We're just colleagues. How dare you accuse me? Colleagues? I sneered, gesturing at the way she was nestled in his arms. Is this what you call colleagues? Her face flushed crimson as she wrenched herself free from Li Ming's embrace. You're talking nonsense. Mr. Zhang, that's crossing a line, Li Ming said mockingly. Chun Jia is an excellent employee. I'm simply showing concern as her superior. Your baseless suspicions hurt her, and your marriage. Marriage? I locked eyes with him, slowly enunciating. Seems like my sudden return hurt your little arrangement instead. Enough! Chun Jia shrieked abruptly. Zhang Chong, stop making a scene. If you keep this up, we're getting a divorce. Divorce? I repeated, feeling an unprecedented sense of relief. In my past life, I endured for the sake of the children and this family my whole life. But what did I gain in the end? My son's resentment, Chun Jia's indifference, and a lifetime of destitution. Fine. I nodded calmly. Since you want a divorce, let's divorce. Chun Jia froze, clearly not expecting me to agree so readily. Her lips twitched as if wanting to say something, but ultimately she just gritted her teeth. Good. You said it yourself. Zhang Chong, are you out of your mind? My mother-in-law's voice came from the doorway. She stormed in, pointing at my nose. Do you know what you're saying? How hard is it to raise a child nowadays? With your parents dead, can you even support one alone? Mom, stop. Chun Jia interrupted her with a hint of impatience. This is between him and me. Stay out of it. How can I not care? My mother-in-law widened her eyes. You're my daughter. How could I watch you marry a useless man? Work yourself to the bone for this family, only to be slandered by him. Zhang Chong, if you were incompetent, don't blame others for looking down on you. If you had any ambition, would Jia have to suffer like this? I sneered. I'm incompetent. Is your daughter cheating on me considered ambition? How dare you spout such nonsense? The mother-in-law's face turned livid with anger. Director Li is Chun Jia's supervisor. They're purely professional. Don't project your insecurities onto others with these filthy accusations. Professional relationship? I pointed at Li Ming. Then explain why he's in our house. In pajamas, no less. The mother-in-law faltered, turning to Chun Jia. Jia, what on earth is going on here? Chun Jia's face paled, her lips trembling but unable to utter a word. Zhang Chong, don't you dare slander people. My brother-in-law, who had returned with my mother-in-law, pointed at my nose and shouted. Don't blame others for looking down on you when you're useless. My sister has been cursed for 8 lifetimes being with you. If you know what's good for you, file for divorce immediately and stop blocking her from finding someone better. Someone better? I sneered. Are you referring to Li Ming? The brother-in-law froze momentarily before flushing with rage. So what if I am? Brother Li Ming is wealthier and more powerful than you'll ever be. If you have any sense, get lost now and stop making a fool of yourself here. Chun Jia said awkwardly. Xiao Zhu, stop talking. I looked at her, but felt no emotional ripples within. In my previous life, I'd softened here, for the children, for this family, choosing to swallow my pride. But this time, I won't repeat past mistakes. Fine. I nodded and turned toward the door, I'll have the divorce papers ready as soon as possible. Zhang Chong. My mother-in-law suddenly called out to me, her tone tinged with panic. Don't be rash. Divorce isn't trivial. You should talk this through properly. Mom, stay out of this. Chen Jia interrupted firmly. I've made up my mind. Good. I smiled faintly and walked out of the house. I went straight to the law firm and drafted divorce papers. In the agreement, I claimed nothing except premarital assets. Just as I left the law office, my phone rang. Chinjia. Zhang Chong. I need to go on a business trip with Manager Li for a few days. Remember to pick up the child. Her voice was cold, as if instructing a stranger. In my previous life, she'd behaved temporarily after my compromise. Perhaps my attitude provoked her, determined to retaliate against me. I chuckled coldly. Sorry, I have business too. Figure out childcare yourself. You. Her voice suddenly rose sharply. How can you do this? The child is your responsibility. Responsibility? I retorted. Isn't the child yours? Have you taken care of them for even one day since they were born? The line went silent for a few seconds before her voice came through gritted teeth. Zhang Chong, don't go too far. You're the one going too far. I said coldly and hung up. In my previous life, I'd missed a crucial opportunity as a self-media practitioner because of the divorce turmoil. This time, I wouldn't let anyone disrupt my plans. I packed my luggage and headed straight to the airport for that fate-changing meeting. At the gathering, I met several top figures in the industry. They showed great interest in my self-media operation proposal, even finalizing cooperation intentions on the spot. Just as I was immersed in the joy of my career taking off, my phone rang again. A message from Chunjia. Zhang Chong, where the hell are you? No one picked up the child. The teacher called me. How can you be so irresponsible? I glanced at it and turned off my phone directly. This time, I wouldn't be led by the nose anymore. Arriving in the new city was perfect for creating fresh self-media content. I stayed there for over half a month, gathering enough footage before returning home. As I entered the house, my son's complaints immediately greeted me. Dad, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you pick me up that day? Do you know how long I waited? He stood in the living room, looking at me with obvious dissatisfaction. Staring at him, a sharp pang shot through my heart. In my previous life, I endured humiliation for his sake, yet in the end, he wouldn't even pay my hospital bills. At this thought, my suppressed rage finally erupted. Slap, I struck him across the face. My son froze, covering his cheek as he stared at me in disbelief. Zhang Chong, what are you doing? Chen Jia's voice rang out from the doorway. She had just walked in and witnessed the scene. You hit our child? Have you lost your mind? She rushed over, shielding our son, her eyes blazing with fury. I'm perfectly sane, I said coldly. I'm just teaching him that E-world doesn't revolve around him. You're utterly unreasonable. Chen Jia trembled with rage. Divorce. We're getting divorced right now. Fine. I nodded. I've been prepared for this for a long time. We went to the Civil Affairs Bureau and submitted the divorce application. Chen Jia's face remained pale, but her attitude was unusually resolute. Just as the staff member was about to stamp the documents, she suddenly covered her mouth and retched several times. What's wrong with you? I frowned. None of your business. She glared at me, then turned and ran to the restroom. I stood there, a vague unease stirring in my heart. I wasn't a greenhorn anymore. I knew what this kind of reaction implied. In our previous life, she hadn't shown any such reaction. Could it be? A few minutes later, Chun Jia returned, her face pale. She glanced at me with a complex gaze. Zhang Chong, I might be pregnant, she said softly. I froze, my mind going completely blank. Pregnant? How is that even possible? We've been sleeping in separate rooms for a long time. How could she be pregnant? Whose is it? I blurted out instinctively. Her face turned deathly pale in an instant. What do you mean? I'm asking, whose child is it? I stared into her eyes, enunciating each word deliberately. You suspect me? Her voice trembled, a flicker of panic flashing in her eyes. Shouldn't I be suspicious? I scoffed coldly. We've slept apart for ages. Tell me, how did this child happen? Zhang Chong, you. Her lips trembled, but she couldn't get the words out. Chen Jia, let's get divorced. I took a deep breath. I won't acknowledge this child. You. Tears immediately welled up in her eyes. How can you be so heartless? I stared at Chen Jia. Her tears fell like broken strings of beads as she said in a trembling voice, Zhang Chong, the child is truly yours. Though our feelings had faded, there was indeed that time. Have you forgotten? I furrowed my brows. What happened over 30 years ago had long become fuzzy in my memory. I couldn't prove the child wasn't mine, nor could I confirm whether her words were true. Are you really sure? I asked coldly. She nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm certain. Zhang Chong, I know we've had many problems, but I never thought of betraying you. The child is yours, I swear. I remained silent for a few seconds, though inwardly sneering. Her acting was truly impressive. Had I not been given a second chance at life, I might have actually fallen for her act. Fine, I believe you. I feigned concession, softening my tone slightly. Chun Jia visibly relaxed, wiping her tears as her voice turned tender. Zhang Chong, I know I haven't been perfect before, making you feel insecure. I'll be more careful from now on. Keep proper distance from other men, give you the security you need. I nodded mechanically, my heart remaining unmoved. Her promises held no meaning for me anymore. Then, let's go back. Withdraw the divorce application. She proposed tentatively, eyes glimmering with hope. I shook my head. No hurry. We'll discuss the divorce later. You're pregnant now. Focus on taking care of yourself first. She paused in surprise, seemingly unprepared for my response, but quickly nodded. Okay, I'll listen to you. After returning home, Chun Jia's attitude had indeed undergone a significant shift. In the past, I had been shouldering nearly all household chores alone, while she routinely cited busy work as an excuse to avoid responsibilities. Now, however, she began taking the initiative to share domestic duties, even bringing in her mother to assist. Jia, how could you ask Mom to do these things? I asked with feigned surprise. She smiled gently. Mom says she's got free time anyway. It's just helping out, no trouble. With your busy work schedule and my pregnancy, we can't let you shoulder everything alone. I nodded and didn't press further. Though visibly displeased, my mother-in-law had no choice but to swallow her grievances and assist, constrained by Chun Jia's pregnancy. She muttered while wiping the table. Honestly, still having to do these things while pregnant? Zhang Chong, can't you help out more? I pretended not to hear, though inwardly sneering. I saw through this mother-daughter act of theirs too clearly. At night, when Chun Jia fell asleep early, I quietly picked up her phone and entered the passcode. This was the password I'd memorized while watching her input it. Opening her WeChat, I scrolled to the chat history with Li Ming. Sure enough, their conversation revealed the complete truth to me. Li Ming, are you sure the child is mine? Chun Jia, of course, don't you trust me? That idiot Zhang Chong would never suspect anything. Li Ming, haha, he's truly pathetic, raising my child. Chun Jia, enough. His attitude has improved lately. He probably believes my story now. Li Ming, what's your plan? Keep deceiving him forever. Chun Jia, after the baby's born, he'll have no way to doubt it. Then we'll make plans gradually. My hand holding the phone trembled slightly, yet my mind remained strangely calm. Sure enough, she had been lying to me all along. This child isn't mine at all. Silently, I put the phone back in its place, lay back on the bed, my mind already forming a plan. In the following days, I seemed to completely forget the past unhappiness, throwing myself wholeheartedly into my career. My self-media account's follower count grew rapidly, advertising collaborations followed one after another, and my income soared accordingly. I left early and returned late every day, swamped with work, but always brought Chun Jia her favorite snacks and supplements. When coming home, honey, how are you feeling today? I asked with concern while peeling an orange for her. She leaned on the sofa, a contented smile on her face. Pretty good, just a bit tired. Then rest more, don't overexert yourself. I handed her the peeled orange, my tone gentle. She took the orange, a complex emotion flashing in her eyes. Zhang Chong, why have you been so good to me lately? I smiled. You're my wife, pregnant with our child. Of course I should treat you well. She lowered her head and took a small bite of the orange, remaining silent. As my attitude towards her grew increasingly warm, Chun Jia gradually let down her guard around me. She began dating Li Ming frequently, sometimes even using overtime work as an excuse to stay out all night. Honey, working late again tonight? I stood at the doorway watching her change shoes. She nodded casually. Yeah, the project's been busy lately. I might come back late. I furrowed my brows. You're pregnant. Don't overexert yourself. She smiled reassuringly. Don't worry, I'll be careful. Watching her retreating figure, I silently pulled out my phone and opened the GPS tracking app. On the screen, her location was moving towards a high-end hotel in the city center. Chun Jia and Li Ming's rendezvous became increasingly frequent, sometimes even engaging in intimate relations despite her physical condition. Through the tracking software, I clearly knew every place she visited. Once, they even engaged in role play in the hotel room, their bold and nauseating dialogue utterly repulsive. Mr. Li, you're exceptionally impressive today. Her voice emerged from the recording device, tinged with coquettishness. Li Ming chuckled. You're no less remarkable. Pregnancy seems to have made you even more demanding. Oomph, all because of you, she teased coyly. I've suffered so much for you. And Zhang Chong, he's been utterly devoted to your son. Listening to the recording, I inwardly sneered. These recordings would become my most potent evidence during the divorce proceedings. On the day the cooling-off period ended, I rose early, gathered all documentation, and prepared to visit the Civil Affairs Bureau. Chun Jia remained asleep. I gently nudged her. Honey, wake up. She blinked drowsily. What's wrong? Today, we're going to finalize the divorce certificate at the Civil Affairs Bureau. My tone remained steady. She froze for a moment, then widened her eyes. Zhang Chong, have you gone mad? I'm pregnant, and you still insist on divorce. I nodded. Yes, I insist. She abruptly sat up, her face pale. Why? Didn't you already forgive me? Weren't you good to the child? I snorted coldly. Forgive you? The child? Do you really think I believe it's mine? Her face instantly turned ashen. You? What do you mean? I took out my phone and played the recording. Her voice emerged from the speaker, carrying a hint of coyness. You care so much about your son. Chun Jia's face drained of color instantly, her lips trembling. You? How could you? How do I have this recording? I sneered. You thought your scheme was flawless, but I knew all along. She collapsed onto the bed, eyes filled with despair. Zhang Chong, let me explain. No need. I cut her off. Get ready. We're going to the Civil Affairs Bureau. She shook her head, tears suddenly welling up. No, I won't divorce. Zhang Chong, I know I was wrong. Give me another chance. I looked at her coldly. Chances? I've given you too many already. This time, I won't soften. She threw herself at me, grabbing my arm. Zhang Chong, don't be like this. The child is innocent. You can't be so cruel. I shook off her hand, voice icy. The child is innocent, but what about you? When you were with Li Ming, did you ever think about the child? She froze, tears streaming down her cheeks, yet couldn't utter a word. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart devoid of any ripples. At the Civil Affairs Bureau, Chun Jia's face remained pale, eyes filled with despair. The staff member glanced at us and asked routinely, Are you both certain about divorcing? I nodded, certain. Chun Jia kept her head down, voice faint. I don't want a divorce. The staff member furrowed their brows. If one party disagrees, the divorce proceedings will be more complicated. I took out my phone, ready to play the recording. Chun Jia's face instantly turned deathly pale, her lips trembling. I agree to the divorce. The staff member nodded and quickly processed the divorce procedures. Walking out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, Chun Jia suddenly grabbed my arm, her eyes filled with pleading. Zhang Chong, can't you really forgive me? I know I was wrong. I really know I was wrong. I shook off her hand, my tone icy. Chun Jia, what we had is over. From now on, you take your broad highway, and I'll take my narrow single-plank bridge. She collapsed onto the ground, tears falling like broken strings of pearls. I turned and left, not a single ripple in my heart. This time, I'd finally broken free from this agonizing marriage completely. After exiting the Civil Affairs Bureau, Chun Jia's face was frighteningly pale, with fine beads of sweat emerging on her forehead. She suddenly clutched my arm again, her voice weak. Zhang Chong, my stomach hurts a bit. Could you take me to the hospital? I frowned, wanting to refuse, but seeing her pained expression, I ultimately nodded. Okay, I'll take you. At the hospital, registering, waiting in line, getting examined, everything went smoothly. When we reached the payment window, Chun Jia instinctively looked at me, her eyes carrying a hint of expectation. I glanced at her coldly. You should contact Li Ming now. Not me. She froze, her face turning even paler, lips trembling. Zhang Chong, are you really this heartless? Heartless, I sneered. Don't get it wrong. The child in your belly isn't mine. She lowered her head, tears silently sliding down, and finally took out her phone to call Li Ming. Not long after, Li Ming hurriedly arrived at the hospital. He walked in furrowing his brows, his tone accusatory. Zhang Chong, what's going on? Chun Jia is pregnant. As her husband, how could you be so irresponsible to her? I stood to the side with my hands in my pockets, watching him coldly. Irresponsible? Then you take responsibility. Li Ming paused, clearly not expecting this response from me. He turned to Chun Jia, his tone gentle. Jia, are you okay? Why the sudden stomachache? Chun Jia kept her head down, didn't dare to speak, and only shook her head slightly. Seeing this, Li Ming glared at me even more displeased. Zhang Chong, what kind of attitude is this? Chun Jia is your wife. How can you be so cold? I sneered and didn't respond. When Li Ming saw my silence, he assumed I felt guilty and smugly taunted. Right. A pauper like you probably can't even afford the medical fees. What a pitiful sight. With that, he turned and walked toward the payment window, pulling out a bank card with a mocking tone. I'll pay. After all, some people can't scrape together even this much. People in line around us, hearing his words, cast scornful glances my way, whispering among themselves. How can someone be like this, ignoring his pregnant wife? Exactly, won't even pay medical fees. Heartless. Look at him, probably a freeloader. I listened to the surrounding whispers, my mind calm as I gazed coolly at Li Ming. Just as Li Ming was about to swipe his card, I suddenly spoke. Wait. Li Ming turned impatiently. What? Finally found your conscience. I smiled, tone steady. No, I just wanted to remind you. Since you're willing to pay, go ahead. After all, This is your child. Li Ming froze, his bank card nearly slipping from his hand. You, what nonsense are you spouting? I shrugged. It's not nonsense. I know about you and Chenjia. This child is yours. The bystanders erupted instantly upon hearing my words. Oh my God, so that's how it is. No wonder he refused to pay. It's someone else's child. This woman is utterly shameless. Pregnant, and still sleeping around with others. Li Ming's face flushed crimson as he pointed at me furiously. You're slandering me. Chenjia, tell me, whose child is this really? Chenjia kept her head down, tears streaming down her face, but couldn't utter a word. Seeing this, Li Ming grew more enraged and humiliated. He grabbed Chenjia's shoulders. Speak. Whose child is this? Chenjia winced in pain and cried out. Li Ming, you're hurting me. Only then did Li Ming realize. He'd lost control. He let go, his face pale with anger. He glanced at the whispering and pointing bystanders, then at me, before finally clenching his teeth, turning and storming away. Li Ming, Chenjia called out, desperation in her voice. Li Ming didn't look back, his footsteps quick as he left the hospital. I snorted coldly, staring at Chenjia. This is the man you chose? Great taste you have. Chenjia clutched her stomach, her face frighteningly pale, as if she hadn't heard me at all. Beads of cold sweat dotted her forehead as she whispered weakly, Zhang Chong. My stomach hurts so bad. I frowned, a vague unease creeping into my heart, but still supported her. Sit down first. I'll call the doctor. The doctor arrived quickly and examined Chenjia. After completing the examination, the doctor's expression turned grave. The patient has experienced fetal demise due to excessively vigorous sexual activity. Immediate medicated abortion and hospitalization for observation are required, the doctor stated solemnly. Chenjia collapsed instantly upon hearing the doctor's words. She grabbed the doctor's hand, voice trembling. Doctor, please, save my baby. I can't lose him. The doctor sighed. We've done all we can, but fetal demise is irreversible. You must undergo the medicated abortion promptly, or it will cause severe harm to your body. Chenjia collapsed onto the hospital bed, tears falling like broken pearls. Covering her face, her voice brimmed with anguish and despair. Why has it come to this? Why? Standing nearby, I watched her coldly, not a single ripple of emotion in my heart. All of this was the harvest of her own sowing. The doctor prescribed the medication, and the nurse quickly brought the drugs for the medical abortion. Chenjia took the medication with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face incessantly. Zhang Chong. She looked up, pleading in her eyes. Could you stay with me? I'm truly terrified. I stared at her, replying in an icy tone. Chenjia, we're already divorced. Your child, you're suffering. None of this concerns me anymore. She froze, silent tears rolling down her cheeks, utterly speechless. I turned and walked out of the ward, not feeling a shred of guilt in my heart. When I returned home, the moment I pushed open the door, I heard my mother-in-law's voice coming from the living room. Xiaozhu, stop this nonsense. How can you just decide not to attend school? Your brother-in-law went through so much trouble to secure your admission. Don't you dare waste his efforts. Mom, I don't want to go to school anymore. My brother-in-law exclaimed impatiently. What's the use of studying? Self-media makes so much money now. Look at my brother-in-law. He makes a fortune just by casually filming videos. I want to do that too. I stood at the doorway, watching them coldly. When my MOT, her in-law saw me return, she immediately put on a smile. Zhang Chong, you're back just in time. Xiaozhu here insists on dropping out of school to do self-media with you. Could you take him under your wing? I furrowed my brows and said coldly, self-media isn't something anyone can do. Xiaozhu should focus on his studies. Hearing this, my brother-in-law immediately became displeased. Brother-in-law, what do you mean by that? Looking down on me. Let me tell you, if I do self-media, I'll definitely be better than you. I sneered. Oh really? Then give it a try. Seeing that I wouldn't budge, my mother-in-law looked visibly displeased. Zhang Chong, how can you speak like this? Xiaozhu is your brother-in-law. If you won't help him, who will? Besides, her voice turned sharp. You're an orphan. You'll need Xiaozhu's support when you're old. If you don't help him now, he'll care for you later? I stared at her, a cold smirk forming in my heart. In my previous life, I'd been trapped by this so-called family bond until I died alone and destitute. You're right, Mom. I nodded calmly. But I might not need Xiaozhu's support after all. My mother-in-law froze. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, my tone steady as still water. Chenjia miscarried. The baby didn't make it. What? Their shocked cries erupted simultaneously. Zhang Chong, what have you done? My mother-in-law's face purpled with rage, finger jabbing toward my face. How could you let this happen when Jiajia was pregnant? My brother-in-law also jumped up. Brother-in-law, you've gone too far. My sister was pregnant, and you made her have an abortion? Are you even human? I looked at them coldly. Have you misunderstood something? The child in Chinjia's belly wasn't mine. What nonsense are you spouting? My mother-in-law trembled with rage. How could Jia be pregnant with someone else's child? Zhang Chang, don't you dare slander people. Whether it's slander or not, you can ask Chinjia yourself. I shrugged. Anyway, we're already divorced. Whose child it is has nothing to do with me. Divorced? Both my mother-in-law and brother-in-law widened their eyes simultaneously, faces filled with disbelief. Zhang Chang, have you gone mad? Jia was pregnant, and you still divorced her? My mother-in-law stamped her foot angrily. Do you have someone else? Did you cause Jia's miscarriage on purpose to get divorced? I sneered coldly. Mom, don't go throwing false accusations around. Chinjia's miscarriage was because she messed around with Li Ming herself. It's got nothing to do with me. You're talking nonsense. My mother-in-law turned livid with rage, pointing at my nose and shouting. Zhang Chang, you heartless bastard. Jia marrying you was the worst luck in the world. How dare you slander her now? I'm telling you, you'd better give me a proper explanation today. Explanation? I scoffed. What kind of explanation do you want? My brother-in-law's eyes shifted cunningly as he suddenly suggested. Brother-in-law, since you've divorced my sister, shouldn't you give me your self-media account? I'll help calm her down for you. What do you say? I looked at him, feeling nauseated. In our previous life, he'd been exactly like this, insatiably greedy, always pushing for more. Give you the account. I laughed derisively. Are you even worthy? The brother-in-law's face darkened with humiliated anger. Zhang Chang, don't you dare disrespect me. I'm warning you, if you don't hand over that account today, this isn't over between us. I had no patience to waste more words on them. Directly taking out my phone, I dialed the property management's number. Hello, property management? There are troublemakers at my place. Please come handle it. Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law erupted. Zhang Chang, what do you mean by this? How dare you call security to evict us? I'm your mother-in-law. I stared coldly at her. We're already divorced. You're no longer my mother-in-law. This is my premarital property. Please leave immediately. You ungrateful wretch. The mother-in-law trembled with rage, plopping onto the floor as she began wailing dramatically. Everyone, come see this. This heartless bastard caused my daughter's miscarriage to get divorced, and now he's kicking us out. What kind of justice is this? Her cries quickly drew neighbors' attention. People gathered, pointing fingers, whispering among themselves. Zhang Chang, how could you do this? Chinjia was pregnant, yet you divorced her? Exactly. How utterly cruel. Zhang Chang, have you found someone else? I sneered and declared loudly. Neighbors, don't listen to her nonsense. The child in Chinjia's belly isn't mine at all. It's hers and her supervisor Li Ming's. I've already divorced her, yet they're still squatting in my house. That's why I called property management. The neighbors immediately erupted in an uproar. Heavens. So that's the truth. No wonder Zhang Chang wanted a divorce. Chinjia actually cheated. How shameless can this mother-daughter pair be? Adulterers daring to make a scene. Seeing the public opinion shift, my mother-in-law turned livid with rage. She pointed a trembling finger at my nose and shouted, Zhang Chang, you're spewing lies. How could my daughter ever cheat? Don't you dare slander her. I scoffed coldly. Whether it's slander, ask Chinjia yourself. At that moment, property staff arrived. Mr. Zhang, what's happening? The property manager asked. I gestured toward my mother-in-law and brother-in-law. These two are causing trouble in my home. Please escort them out. The property manager nodded and walked up to my mother-in-law. Auntie, please cooperate and leave this place. My mother-in-law trembled with rage, pointing at my nose and curs. Ing, Zhang Chang, you ungrateful wolf. Just you wait. I won't let you off the hook. I sneered coldly. Suit yourself. The property manager and several security guards forcibly escorted my mother-in-law and brother-in-law out. Their curses gradually faded into the distance as they were led away. I closed the door and finally let out a deep sigh of relief. This time, I had finally completely broken free from this torturous marriage and shaken off those so-called family bonds that had shackled me. Sitting on the sofa, I opened my phone and looked at the continuously growing follower count and income on my self-media account, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. From this moment on, my life would be completely transformed. Never again would I be led by the nose. Never again would I swallow my pride for so-called family obligations. I would live for myself and carve out a life that truly belonged to me. Early the next morning, I received a call from Chinjia. Her voice sounded weak and exhausted. Zhang Chang, can you come to the hospital? There's something I need to tell you. I furrowed my brows, replying coldly. There's nothing left for us to discuss. Zhang Chang, I know I was wrong. Her voice trembled with tears. I truly regret it. Can you forgive me? Let's start over, okay? I scoffed. Chinjia, do you really think that's possible? She fell silent for a few seconds before murmuring. Zhang Chang, I know I wronged you, but I genuinely regret it. Could you give me one more chance? I took a deep breath, my tone icy. Chunjia, it's over between us. From now on, you walk your sunlit path, and I'll cross my single-plank bridge. With that, I hung up. After ending the call, I paid no heed to Chunjia's pleas. Days later, I learned from friends about what happened next between Chunjia and Li Ming. It turned out that after Li Ming learned about Chunjia's miscarriage, not only did he refuse to visit her in the hospital, but he also blocked all her contact information outright. Chunjia couldn't accept this reality. Emotionally shattered, she ran to the company and caused a scene. In front of all her colleagues, she pointed at Li Ming's nose and called him a heartless scum, even exposing all the intimate details of their ambiguous relationship. The company's senior management was furious, deeming their behavior to have severely damaged the company's image, and summarily dismissed both of them. Having lost his job and ruined his reputation, Li Ming became enraged, had a complete falling out with Chunjia on the spot, and even threatened to sue her for defamation. Chunjia, meanwhile, was forcibly removed from the company by security guards due to her emotional breakdown. Hearing all this, I felt no significant emotional stir. All of this was brought on by her own doing. I quickly sold the house and took all my savvy NGS to pursue opportunities in a bigger city. There, with more opportunities and a larger market, my self-media career reached new heights. In this new city, I rebuilt my life from scratch. No more entanglement from Chunjia, no meddling from my mother-in-law, and no relentless demands from my brother-in-law. I focused on my career, connected with more like-minded friends, and my life became fulfilling and liberating. Occasionally, I would think about the past, but those memories no longer stirred any emotions within me. I was no longer the man who swallowed his pride for the so-called family, but rather a free individual living for himself. As for the outcomes of Chunjia and Li Ming,